Americans have always loved their cars, but it wasn't until the years following World War II that the term sports car entered our vocabulary. Light, nimble cars like Porsches, MGs, and Alfa Romeos introduced us to a whole new way of driving. And of course, they quickly found their way onto the racetrack as well. It was a time when the cars were memorable and fast, and competition was fierce. Racing technology is constantly moving forward, and today's racing sports cars are marvels of speed and handling. But a lot of folks believe that vintage and historic racing cars deserve better than a dusty corner of some museum. Historic Sports Car Racing Limited is a group of enthusiasts who believe the proper place for a race car is on the track at speed. Speed Machines is a look at HSR and its unique brand of racing. The Rolex 24 at Daytona is one of the world's great races. It's a grueling test of endurance for both the cars and the people who race them. HSR is helping to commemorate the efforts and achievements of past competitors with this invitational display of historic Daytona race cars. As we wander through the display area, I'm sure that you'll be struck by a fond memory or two. On the morning of the 24-hour race, HSR staged a pair of events on the famed road course. First was this photo recreation of the closest finish in endurance racing, Jackie Ickx's victory over Hans Hermann in the 1969 Le Mans 24 Hours. As the cars returned to the infield after the photo session, race fans could once again hear the sound of a pair of thoroughbred racing engines at work. Then came an on-track tour for cars which had competed at Daytona, a display which the crowd loved. While the historic racing cars circulated out on the road course, we caught up with HSR President Steve Simpson in the infield and chatted about the philosophy of vintage racing.
Well, the concept here is to get these cars out and campaign them competitively like they used to be driven, but not damage them. So we have an etiquette to the sport, but yet we drive them competitively and fast. Now we also ensure that the cars are prepared as they were. In other words, the era in which they originated and competed in, that's how we keep them. So we don't allow them to be updated beyond that. So we drive them the way they were back then.
Road Atlanta, in the red clay hills of North Georgia, is the site of the Walter Mitty Challenge, one of the largest gatherings of vintage and historic machinery in the eastern United States. The pits and paddock were crowded with more than 300 race cars of all shapes and sizes. There was a new delight around every corner. Walter Mitty Challenge this year featured a reunion of many of the classic Can-Am sports racing cars which thrilled race fans during the 60s and 70s. But this was no static display of old cars. These cars got out on the track and dueled, just like they did back in 1970.
The Can-Am reunion today is a reunion in more ways than one for you, because you're coming back to the track where you competed in the very first professional race ever run. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that was a really innovative sort of race.
Well, it was a very innovative sort of race for several reasons. One, it was a new track and none of us knew what to expect. And secondly, we had the Chaparral fan car there, which was very innovative. And it was a very exciting time for me because I had a very good chance to win the race. Unfortunately, I had a crash with Peter Revson. I was running second, 5 seconds behind him, and he crashed in the bridge turn, and I couldn't avoid him. But it was an innovative race, and I think it put Road Atlanta on the map, because to have a Can-Am race in 1970 on any circuit, everybody followed the Can-Am series at that time. And I think it was a big stepping stone for Road Atlanta to have a Can-Am race as their first feature race.
With 1970 Can-Am winner Tony Dean in attendance as official flagman, Dale Phelan in the beautifully restored ex-Mark Donohue Sunoco Lola took the victory in the Can-Am reunion race. We spoke with a happy Dale Phelan after his lap of honor, and also reminisced with Tony Dean about the glory days of the Can-Am series.
Congratulations, Dale. Great drive. Tell us a little bit about what it felt like out there.
Well, the car handled real well, and we made a few suspension changes, and it seemed to work pretty well, and I was able to hold Brian off. I don't know if he was being kind or not, but it was the race was. I was happy to see the checkered flag when I did.
According to Brian, he was flat out the whole way around, so you done good. It must be a real thrill to have all that horsepower at your back.
It's a thrill that few people experience. It's awesome, and it's to be revered. You have to treat it carefully. It can bite you.
For 1970 winner Tony Dean, this is a reunion in more ways than one. Bring back some memories?
Oh, it brings back a million memories, I'll tell you, but I never thought 23 years ago that I would be here 23 years later waving the checkered flag for a Can-Am race. But, you know, who knows what's in store for one, you know? Next year, I hope to be racing here myself, next year.
When you took the green back in 1970 with Halm and Peter Gethin, Revson, and Vic Elford and the Chaparral in front of you, did you have the slightest inkling that you'd wind up taking the checker first?
Oh, no, I didn't. No. I mean, it was a race of attrition, and it was a hell of a race. I think it's one that went down in motor racing history because people, wherever you go in the world, I was in Japan last week, and even a guy came up to me and said, I remember you at Road Atlanta in Japan, you know, and that was last week. It's amazing. But no, obviously I didn't think I was going to win that race. I thought I would be in the first 6, which I normally was, you know. But the attrition rate was greater than I expected, and 8 laps to go there I was in the lead, you know, which I was delighted about, obviously.
The race that really had the fans up against the fences was Group 8. This field featured the big Formula cars, including Formula One, Indy cars, Formula Atlantics, and a pack of Formula 5000 cars with their fire-breathing V8s. It's not like these are unknown cars either. As Ben Treadway relates, his Penske PC-10 Indy car is pretty famous, or notorious.
It came to the United States in the spring of '82, and Rick Mears sat on the pole at Phoenix in it and won the Phoenix race. He came to Atlanta, which was one of the last IndyCar races held in Atlanta. There was a race in '83, but he sat on the pole in '82 with this car and won the race in Atlanta. And then this was the team backup, Penske team backup car for Mears and Kevin Cogan in Indianapolis. Cogan had some problems with his main car and ended up in this car. It sat on the front row between Mears and A.J. Foyt, and this is the car that spun in front of the Indianapolis field in 1982 and knocked A.J. Foyt and Mario Andretti out of the race.
flag right behind him. 12 and a solid third. Tomorrow as well. 66 and 45. Redmond Gelnick in that order.
In addition to his duties as president of HSR, Steve Simpson also finds time to get behind the wheel of the ex-Al Unser Lola Formula 5000 car. Don't think you can relax out there, though.
What's it like to drive Al Unser's race car?
Well, it's an absolute thrill. This thing's a rocket ship, and he drove it 100% better than I can drive it, and I tell you, I couldn't have any more fun.
Tell me a little bit about this history of this car.
Well, this car was campaigned by the Vels Parnelli Jones team. They had 2 Formula One cars, 2 Indy cars, and 2 of these. These are Formula 5000 cars, and it was a professional circuit ran in the States for a Formula One chassis with a 5-liter engine in it. It was a very popular sport, paid a lot of money, attracted all the top drivers from Europe and all the top Indy drivers. And so Parnelli Jones fielded a team with Al Unser Sr. and with Mario Andretti. And Mario also drove his Indy car, and he also drove his Formula One car. But the two of them paired up to drive these 5000s. And this is Unser's car, and the sister car was Andretti's number 5. And these cars ran in 74, 75, and 76. And let's see, Al finished in 75. Al finished 3rd in the series behind Mario and behind Brian Redmond, who's right over here, driving the car he won the series in. Then in 76, Al beat Mario and finished 2nd, again falling behind Brian, who's right next door. And I'll tell you, it's a real thrill to follow Brian around here.
I bet.
It's a real lesson, I'll say, to follow him around here. Sort of out of breath from driving this thing. It takes a little concentration and strength to keep
A little bit different than working with the accounting business during the week, right?
Well, yeah, it's a good relaxation.
While the victory celebration was going on for the Can-Am racers, the sport's timed run competitors took to the track. This unique format allows special interest vehicles to compete against the clock. It also produces the most interesting mix of cars you'll find on the circuit at any one time.
Out of Savannah, Georgia, the 61 MGA. 72 is Curtis Jones out of Birmingham, Alabama. From Gainesville, Florida, a 54 305. Atlanta, Georgia, 59 Austin Sprite, 51 Great Shoot on the Stone Mountain, Georgia, 75. traffic going off, that's for battle going on out there between 73 and... John Buller takes fourth. Coming up next, our last 8 laps.
HSR and the Walter Mitty Challenge aren't just about cars, however. The real story in vintage racing is the people who compete. One of these people is former professional stock car driver Harry Dinwiddie, who has recently returned to competition with a car that has a lot of personal meaning for him.
Well, this is the old car I won championship with in '79, and I had sold it to a guy in Indianapolis and found it and bought it back. And when I found out, when I had left NASCAR, I was totally burnt out on the sport, and that was in '84. And when I left the sport, I had no regrets, stayed away from it for about, until 1990. And found this car again, and all my friends that was running this new series, the Historic Vintage Racing Series, and I looked around at the different vintage series, SVRA, and there's 2 or 3 others, and settled on the HSR group.
Tell me about your career in NASCAR.
Well, my career in NASCAR was kind of a up and down situation. We started in 1980, running the Talladega 500, then progressed to running my own team and running for Rookie of the Year in 1981. Ran with the team, DK Ulrich's team, who has a car now that runs NASCAR every week, the show. But back those days, it was kind of an up and down career, like I said. I did real good to a point, and then it was hard on an independent, trying to provide his own team and own individual money. Not a whole lot to say. Ran about 4 years, Did pretty well, but not as good as I did with the sports cars when I was running in the 70s.
Not all the interesting people at a vintage race are wearing driving suits and helmets. Our cameraman has a fine eye for spotting beauty wherever it can be found. It's always exciting when the big bore cars get on the track, and never more so than during the competition exhibition race. These big horsepower cars will keep your pulse high whenever they're on the course. One of the most impressive sights at this year's Mitty was the racing action featuring the single-seaters of the Monoposto Register. The on-track action and the beautiful condition of these race cars made them a real treat to watch. Vintage and historic racing recalls the past. One of the best people to link the past with the present is Brian Redman, who's not only one of the greatest drivers of our time, but a fascinating storyteller as well. We caught up with Brian in the paddock.
Well, that was a fairly monumental race because the blue car there is John Paul Jr. And John Paul Jr. is and was one of the best drivers in the business. He'll be driving at Indy today. He's a superb driver, but when this photograph was taken, he was 21 years old and I was about 45 years old, and he was the young charger and I was the seasoned pro, and we had a very good race. Again, we had an incident. There was a car crashed under the bridge and it burst into flames upside down, and the blazing fuel spread across the track, and I was already going too fast to stop, and I drove through the flames, and I knew they were going to stop the race, and I still had a fuel halt to make, so I came straight into the pits. We refueled, but by this time the red flag was out. That means come to a halt. So I drove around and joined the field at the scene of the accident and halted. But, of course, we again had gained a lap, and all the top running cars in the race said that unless they were given a lap as well, they were going to retire, one of whom was John Paul. But he didn't retire, and we carried on, and we had a very good race, and he finished up making a young driver's minor error, and braked a bit too late in turn 6 up at the top here, and went off the track, and it just gave me time to get by and to take the race. So that was a very memorable race for me. It was a good race.
The hallmark of HSR competition is the Rolex Vintage and Historic Endurance races, which feature a 1-hour format with a mandatory pit stop. The number 73 Porsche of Jack Lewis and Bill Farron jumped into the lead from the green flag, and we had a chance to talk with Jack before he climbed in to drive the anchor leg.
Jack, in addition to the vintage series that you race with your 356, you also race in IMSA's 911 GTU series. Would you compare the two cars?
Well, really, the 911 is just a big 356. One of my co-drivers, Bill Farron, is always saying that the two cars are so similar, except, you know, the gearing's similar, the handling characteristics are similar. It's just the 911 is the 356's big brother.
In Victory Lane, there was a real feeling that the main object of the race had been to have a good time, and that made everybody winners on this day.
Hey, we're in Winner's Circle, and very happy Jack Lewis and Bill Farron here in Winner's Circle. And Jack, you missed the Sebring race, is that right? So this is your first win of the season.
That's right. This is the first win of the season. We're really happy. I want to congratulate Bill on doing a great job. He started on the pole, started the race today, and gave me the car with a 25-second lead. Did a fantastic job. He only had 2 laps in the car prior to the start of the green flag. Turned the best times the car's turned all weekend. Just did a fantastic job as usual. So I want to keep the Jack and Bill show going as long as we can.
The famed asphalt of Atlanta Motor Speedway hosted the next event on the HSR calendar, the Dixie Challenge. Cars and drivers gathered from all across the nation to test the new infield road course at AMS. But above all, the word on everyone's lips at the Speedway was stock cars. A new movement in historic racing, but one which is rapidly gaining momentum, is the preservation and racing of historic vintage stock cars. One of the main forces behind this movement is noted professional race driver Gene FELTON. Along with his team owner, Barry Kieselstein-Cord, FELTON is building bigger fields and more interest in historic stock car racing.
Gene, tell me about how you came up with this idea for historic NASCAR racing.
Well, having grown up in the South, I've always been interested in stock cars, NASCAR in particular. I've followed them, I've actually driven them, I've worked on them, I've known people that own them and drive them. So about a year ago, several of us vintage racing guys were talking about something new to do in vintage racing. And actually it wasn't my idea to form the group, but I was part of the group that was formed. And we decided just to go out and find some cars and restore them and start a group for vintage racing with stock cars.
You can't beat the action when HSR's racing sedans get on the track. They're beautifully prepared and evenly matched. And on a track which everyone was learning, the racing was one of the highlights of the weekend.
We built it this last year, just kind of a lark. We've been racing Porsches for a number of years, and we wanted to do something that was a little more fun and a little less expensive, and maybe get the kids involved at some point.
Did you restore it?
Yeah.
What kind of lap times are you getting out there?
Well, we're doing about 2:04, so we're doing as good as some of the small bore production cars from the Volkswagen, so we're real pleased with that. It's a lot of fun to drive, real hoot.
We've spoken to some professional drivers here on Speed Machines, but the true character of HSR is its acceptance of drivers who aren't pros. One such racer is Chapman Root.
Chapman, you brought a 962 Porsche up here this weekend, and this morning you were driving around the track with all the NASCAR historic guys. What was that like?
Well, it was a lot of fun, but the cars are from two different worlds, obviously. And so the places where they would be comfortable with me getting right up next to them maybe isn't a good place for me, and vice versa. The inherent handling differences of the cars is quite significant. The one thing, that the top speed, of course, they're geared for that, so with the unrestricted horsepower that the stock cars are running here on the straightaways and up on the bank, and that's what they're meant for. In the infield, my car handles better, but they have a difficult time seeing me, and on the narrow sections of the infield course, it's hard to get up to a car that you're not sure if they're really aware that you're behind them or beside them on a narrow track and get past them cleanly.
Once again, endurance racing is a major part of an HSR race meeting. This time, it's the historic Enduro, with big displacement sedans on the high banking of AMS.
With the brake fluid is coming off of the front brake, so we canceled the race.
Historic Enduro winner Angelo CILLI was a happy driver as he climbed out of his Franz Blom-prepared Porsche 930 and talked with our Speed Machines camera crew and reporter Garia Zane.
My arms are numb.
Tired?
Yeah, I mean, there is a tremendous kickback from the steering wheel because of the bumps on the oval, and it's really, really, really tough. You know, especially when you are trying to shift on NASCAR 3 and 4, between 3 and 4, and you have to let go of the steering wheel with one hand and go into fourth gear. I went every time.
And how?
I don't know how these NASCAR guys do this for 500 miles.
Then it was the historic stock car's turn. The starting field drove out of the pit lane and up onto the high banking of Atlanta Motor Speedway, where many of them had run so many race miles in past years. This time, however, there would be an added twist. Instead of the 1 1/2 mile oval, the stock cars would be running the brand new road course. Fans would get to see the cars both on the high banks and snaking through the tricky high-speed turns of the infield.
Tell me about this Ford.
Well, this is one of the small models, as you can see. Takes up a lot of room on the track. It's a 68 Torino, probably titled in 69. It is of the CJ version, as they called it, and this particular one has minimum racing history in terms of famous drivers, but it runs some Winston races, which back then was Grand National, and eventually it went to the owner's son, who runs Circle Track in North Carolina with it, with some of the NASCAR stuff, and it was parked somewhere around 79 or 80, and we acquired it in a from a gentleman we were doing a restoration for, and found out about it and just picked up the car, and we've kind of restored it and get out and have a little fun with it.
We hope that Speed Machines has been able to convey the tremendous amount of fun that can be found everywhere in HSR historic and vintage racing. As we were talking with drivers, crew chiefs, families, and fans at Daytona, Road Atlanta, and AMS, one comment kept popping up. We'll leave you with some of the answers we received to the question, why do you like historic sports car racing so much?
You know, the organization is top class, and it's probably one of the best series going anywhere right now.
HSR, I think, offers the most track down for the dollars you got to spend. It's a good group of guys, and the camaraderie is great, I think. And
they're kind and generous. Any of them will help you with anything that you need at any given time.
Spirit of the racing is fun. They tend to attract some nice cars for the type of races that I run in. Very enjoyable crowd.
We are all a group of people that are just having a good time and enjoying the different tracks around the country.
Older cars, a nice group of people.
And there's 2 or 3 others, and settled on the HSR group. Some of the best people I've ever raced with, and they're really, really fun and make the sport fun.